lately I've had to put on my tool belt, drywall and painting and carpentry work and all that other stuff, which I don't mind. I love doing the work. I enjoy. I have a metal shop and a wood shop, which, interestingly enough, was not set up either. So between at the end of March, when we finished our shows, I've been getting my table saw set up and tuned and dust collection system in. I've got my metal shop, all my horizontal bandsaw and Burr Kings and welding tables and everything. It rushed it while it was sitting here.
You should just say screw it. I'm going to do a reality show.
I powered brush and get all of the rust off and repaint it, set it up. It's now drilled into the concrete and anchors and screwed in with 3/4-inch bolts. And I'm starting to feel pretty good about having things starting to function. And now I just finished the main room for the studio, which was supposed to be really the shop. So I'm putting on a vinyl baseboard in the next couple of days. That'll finish that up after having painted it and ripping out, air conditioning ducts that were in the wrong place and putting up drywall and patch and paint. So I'm almost ready to move all the stuff from the actual studio into there so I can finish that room. And then once that's done, I put everything from the control room in there and raise the floor. So I'm well on my way to getting myself back into business. And so I could only thank the COVID virus for that one.
Well, I tell you, Jim, what you should do is not do music anymore. Just do a reality show.
I could, but the reality is I don't like to get up at 6 o'clock every morning and go to work. Sometimes I'm up at 8. Sometimes I'm up at 7:30. Sometimes I decide I'm just too damn tired to do it today in the morning at all. So it's a work in progress.
Now, do you take home improvement requests? If I need something done at my house, will you come down here and help me out a little bit?
That would be a big hell no.
I'm a little unsure what you meant by that. I'm still in the gray area, I guess.
But hey, when we got this interview, we did a lot of research on you. And my God, you had one hell of a career. I mean, you've been in everything. You've been behind the scenes. You've been up front on the stage. I mean, how in the hell did you do all that?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. It's just who I am. It's part of what I enjoy. Even as a kid, I used to build, radios and out of toilet paper and razor blades and pencil lead. And
so you're like MacGyver?
When I was supposed to, by hanging an antenna outside my bedroom window. So it's always been in my nature, electronics and music, and it's something I've always loved. And fortunately, I've been able to say no to drugs all my life. So I haven't had that as alcohol or drugs as a monkey on my back. So I've been able to focus and work. For me, I've learned that my luck has come from being prepared when opportunity knocks, and then when it does, it's usually a lot of work. It seems like some people it just sort of happens and then success is there, but for me it's different, and it's okay because I am a craftsman. I like building. I like the process of getting there. So with that in mind, I've had to learn to be patient and let it all happen.
But now, you started all of this many, many years ago just wanting to be in the music industry, right? Didn't you have a band like when you were 13, 14 years old?
Yeah, I started out, I was living in California in the beach area, and so I was sort of like a little surfer boy at 11 and 12 years old, and my parents decided, my mother was from Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, which I had actually grown up from the age of 2 to when I entered, fourth grade. And then my stepfather was from Arkansas, Little Rock.
Oh, wow.
And so I had the two different types of families. I had the Indian side on my mother's side and the redneck side on the stepfather's side. And then on my on my father's side, they were Italian immigrants from Italy. So I had a very mixed type of growing up. You know, the Italian side said, you know, keep your nose clean and stay out of drugs, or you'll regret ever having had this conversation. And on my redneck side, the Indian side, you know, we camped and we listened to country music, and we did all kinds of things that kids don't normally get to do, playing with horny toads and living in the Gulf of New Mexico. Was quite a way of having a wonderful life. You know, in Texas, we were told you do not go to somebody's house after dark without an invitation, or you might get shot. And that left quite an impression on me.
Yeah, that kind of stings.
As I'm living in Tennessee right now, I can understand why.
Yeah, that must have really been rough when you're trick or treating.
Yeah, you don't want to be tricking, especially when you're trying to treat.
But you know, you started out. You really wanted to be you like more the engineering and the producing side of the stage, right?
Well, what happened was I started out, as you said, at 13, playing at the local country club pool house with kids before I entered high school. We would entertain the children while the parents in Colton, the people with the most money were the people really who lived in Grand Terrace, and Grand Terrace supported the local Air Force base. So you had a lot of pilots and people of high rank that were there. And of course, you know, pilots find themselves more comfortable, like sailors, having a few drinks before they, so they get their legs.
Before they start flying.
That's terrifying.
You know, it kind of takes the wobble out of the legs. And of course, now what do you do with the kids? So they would send them down to the pool house, where Jimmy Messina would entertain them by playing, you know, Ventures songs or Champ songs or that kind of stuff. So that helped me to get started. And all through high school, I had a band. You know, I made anywhere from $5 to $15 a night.
Wow!
And,
what was the name of your band?
I was able to. Huh?
What was the name of your band?
Well, we started out first as the Boutonniers at the country club, and then we went to the Pendletons, and then eventually to the what's the word I'm trying to think of? The Jesters.
Okay.
And we used to make, you know, by the time I got into high school in the 10th grade, we might make $100 a night or $150 a night for all of us. But, you know, 20 or 25 bucks a night, a couple nights a week was $50. That was a lot of money for high school to make a kid, especially when gas was, you know, 25, 30 cents a gallon. And,
wow. Now, did
and
you
I remember,
teach yourself?
you know, my rent was $25 a week.
Oh, wow.
So I was away, and my first car was a 1948 Chevrolet sedan coupe,
Wow!
which I bought from Jimmy Webb's father. You know, the songwriter.
Wow! You was
Jimmy
living
Webb's
the life
father was
there.
a preacher, and I bought it from him. And I didn't know later, till I got in the moonlight, that they had painted it with spray cans, and some of it was that glow in the dark. So on a moonlight night, I could find my car in a parking lot pretty easily.
That's a plus right there. You don't get any better than that.
That's it.
You can't hide from
Come
anybody.
to think of it, it's probably why I never got into an accident. I'd be driving down the road, and they say, "Oh my God, what is that? Is that an unidentified flying object in the middle of the street?"
Now, how did you learn how to play the guitar? Did you teach yourself, or did you take lessons as a kid?
Well, my father was a guitarist, a really good one.
Cool.
And he played like Merle Travis and Chad Atkins and people like that. And I was just so enthralled with his ability to play that I always wanted to play like my dad. So there was always a guitar around under the bed or in the closet. So whenever especially during the summers, because I stayed with my dad when I was out of school, he'd work and I'd get a chance to play with his guitar. But he would help me. But, you know, some of the ways in which I learned, in California, we had a television show called Cal's Corral, where he has a car dealership, and he'd have on the weekends he'd have usually country artists come out and play. We saw Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Two there, Joe and Rosalie Mavis,
sure,
Collins Kids. I can't remember some of the other artists at the time, but I would watch their fingers and see how they would play, and then I try to imitate them. You know? So in those days, that's how you learned, by watching and observing. But mostly from television shows and 45 records, listening to the records and trying to figure out what the chords were and the key that they were playing in.
That's amazing.
I guess you'd say in this day and age, a lot of research work.
Oh yeah, and you don't have YouTube back then.
We couldn't Google a thing.
So how'd you get into the engineering and producing side of the industry?
Well, the first album I made called the Dragsters, Jim Messina and the Jesters, got the attention of a DJ, Glenn Edwards, working at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim. Somehow got a hold of me and asked me if I'd be interested in producing. Of course, I didn't know what that meant. I said, well, producing what? And what are you talking about? He said, well, I just want you to get together with some of the artists that I have on my label, listen to their music, and if need be, play with them or make sure they have the right musicians and that the songs sound right to you.
And how old were you at this time?
16.
Oh, my God.
And so I said, well, okay. And so I got, my first job was working in Hollywood at a radio station called, at a studio called Emperor Productions, which was owned by Bob Hudson, who worked at KRLA. He had the morning drive from 6 a.m. to whatever. That was the top number one position you could have. He later went on to become a comedy team with Hudson and Lambert. You might have known him as that. Anyway, he had an engineer named Mike Durow. And Mike Durow was put together with me in his studio, and they brought the musicians in, and I'd listen to the songs and the artists and get the stuff recorded on tape, get the vocals sounding the way I would want them, and mix them the way that I felt they should sound, and I'd deliver them, and he was happy. So that was my beginning as a record producer from 16 to 17. Now, when I graduated, I worked there for a little bit, but then he went out of business. He never had any hits, and so I had an opportunity to work with the engineer there named Mike Durow, and by that time, I didn't really think I was going to ever be a success as a musician. There were just too many great players there: Joe Osborne, James Burton, Hal Blaine, all of the, Leon Russell.
Oh, wow.
There was just Glenn Campbell was a guitarist. There were so many great people. I just didn't feel that I was going to work, so I decided to continue as an apprentice, learning how to become an engineer. So. And I worked under Mike Durow as his assistant. We became pals and friends, and eventually, he'd get a job and not like it and call me and say, hey, can you take over for me? And I'd go to work, and that kind of happened. He was somewhat neurotic, and because he was such a genius. Nowadays, Mike Durow is a very famous designer who designed many, many multi-band compressors that are used in radio stations, I think, even to this day. His greatest credit is he designed a VU meter called the Durow. That was the first meter that could actually not only measure peaks and averages, but it could also measure loudness, which is a third construct in how sound is perceived. In which he was able to actually create a device that would monitor that at the same time.
So
his meters are very well known. They're digital.
So when you was doing all this, how did you wind up with Buffalo Springfield. Hello? Hello?
Well, he didn't like that question at all.
Hello? Jim, are you there? We'll try again.
We lost Jim. Technical difficulties, but we'll be right back. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
16.
Hello?
Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I can hear you talking, but are you on a cell phone?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably why your cell dropped out. What was the last thing you heard?
No, well, you was talking about your producing and everything like that. But what I was going to ask you was, how did you wind up? Oh, no, you was talking about the meters of your friend, and then.
Well, I was just about ready to get there.
Okay.
And what happened is that Mike DeRoe was working at Sunset Sound Recorders and didn't like it. So he asked me to come down and do a job interview with Tootie Camarada, who owned it. And Tootie was opening up a second studio, Studio 2. So I met with him, and he liked me, and he said, I'd like to have a young person working here. I was probably 19 at the time. And so he gave me a studio of my own to work.
Oh, wow.
And so while I was working there, I had done Lee Michaels' Carnival of Life album. I had done Claudine Lauger, who was an artist, Andy Williams' wife at the time.
So, did you get any kind of blowback at all from any of the artists saying, what does this kid know? He's only 18, 19 years old. I'm not going to listen to him. Did you get anything like that from any of these artists?
No, because the work I did, they loved. It sounded as good as anything else anybody else had done. And going back to, Ibis Records, it's not always because something doesn't sound good, or it was a poor job that something didn't sell. Most of the time it's you don't have enough money to promote it. And promotion is all key when it comes to selling records. To the point where some people do it illegally, obviously because they want to get the attention on it, and that at times does sell the records. But with Sunset Sound, in any job that you get, if you do a good job, people know that. If someone says, I'm not going to work with him because he's too young, or because it's a woman, or because his ears are too large, it's a reflection on the person who's making the statement more than it is on the product. So everything that I did out of there always got great reviews, and which leads me to the story about the fact that I got a call from the office one time from Gypsy, who ran it. She says, I got a guy coming in tomorrow. His name is David Crosby, and he wants to do a demo.
Holy cow.
Can you be here at 10 a.m. in the morning to do it? And I was working till 2 that night, and I said, yeah, I could do it. I said, is that David Crosby? I said, is that Bing Crosby's son? And she said, I don't think so, but I'm not sure. So anyway, I show up the next day, set up the mics, comes in. He's got a female artist with him, songwriter. And I set up a mic, and we finish doing the stuff, and I really liked it. It was really great. And so I said, who should I put down here as the producer? And he says, David Crosby. And of course, I wasn't going to ask him if he was the son or not. And then I said, well, who's the singer or the artist? And he goes, that would be Joni Mitchell.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So David goes off of this session. Of course, Joni got her deal from that demo with A&M Records. And David goes off, and he's working with the Buffalo Springfield, and he says, hey, I met this young recording engineer at Sunset Sound where they wanted to work. He says, you might want to give him a try. I think he did a great job for me. So they booked in. They didn't get me originally. They got an older guy, which didn't work out for him. So then Gypsy said, I think I should put you on this session. Let's see what happens. they're closer to your age, she says. So you have to realize that being young in those days got you jobs
That was
because
a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
the Buffalo Springfield, they were only a couple of years older than me, at most. And so when they started working with me, we all enjoyed each other, and the rest is history.
So where were you living at this time?
I was living in Burbank. I was and still am pretty straight when it comes to weirdness, and I preferred living in a more traditional community like Burbank as opposed to Hollywood, where things were always just crazy.
Now, after reading some of that stuff, so was it hard to keep the band together in the Buffalo Springfield?
Well, let me just say that I came in as their engineer on their second album, so I wasn't involved with any of the group dynamics. It wasn't until the third album when I became their producer and then eventually a bass player and engineer that I began to sense what was happening, and even then not really all that was happening, because my job was to engineer and produce, and by that time it was playing bass. I didn't have any time to get involved in any drama or political aspects of the band, nor was I asked to, thank God. But what I did note is that I was having a hard time getting him to come into the studio to finish up that last album. And I'd had a conversation with Ahmed Erdogan wherein I asked him, what should I do? I mean, I can't get him to show up. And he said, well, let's get them into New York. He said, I'll fly them in. We'll put them up in a hotel close to the studio, so all they got to do is get up, come in, and work. I said, sounds great to me. So we booked time at their studio. He put everybody up in the hotels. I showed up. Richie showed up. I think Dewey showed up. Stephen flew in. Neil never came.
Oh, Neil.
And it ended up that Stephen didn't come down to the sessions. Dewey did, but Dewey was a very spiritual kind of guy. He really liked to indulge in spirits. And by the time he showed up one night to do Carefree Country Day, he was so drunk he couldn't even sit on the stool.
Oh man,
so
that's bad.
We ended up getting Kind Woman cut. We ended up getting, can't remember the other two tunes. We cut a couple of songs. Carefree Country Day. But that was all we were able to get done. And by the time we got back to California, I still had the same problem in getting the records, getting them in to finish things. And when I did, it was always just one at a time. I'd get Stephen in. I got Stephen's tunes, Questions, and a few other songs, Four Day Night or something like that. And Neil came in and he did his own tune, I Am a Child, in the studio next to me, which I was grateful for. So it was a big job putting that last record together and trying to make it sound uniform and consistent, because things were being recorded different times, different studios. And thank God I'd worked with Mike Giroux, because we used to do the Dick Clark Hollywood Hotline and all the edits and level changes that had to be done there. And then Casey Kasem, we did that at the studio. So I'd had a lot of experience with editing prior to that. So, and with the Buffalo Springfield, it required a lot of editing, because they didn't really. I mean, the best records that were made that the Springfield did, I thought were like Bluebird, which they cut all at one time, with the exception. Stephen wanted to put a banjo on the end of it eventually.
So putting that album together, how long actually did it take you to get all that together, to finally get that?
I don't
produced?
know. I don't know. I mean, for me, it was one big blur. You'd have to look at the release date of the album, and you'd have to kind of look at the release date of the previous album, and somewhere in between that time, I'm in the studio all the time.
So when did you finally just say that enough is enough? I can't take this anymore.
Well, I never got to that point. Being a record producer and an engineer, that's not a luxury one should have. Especially if everybody's working together. Now, it's quite a different thing if you got somebody who's mean-spirited or violent or drugged out and crazy. But that wasn't the Buffalo Springfield. There was no drugs that I could see going on. Neil was not a drug user. In those days he had some complications health-wise, which he was taking the prescription for, but so was my aunt, and Stephen didn't like drinking in those days, and because Dewey was such a drinker, he had an issue against alcohol because he could see what it was doing to Dewey and his music. So, as young men, there were no drug issues that I was aware of, and I certainly didn't take any drugs. I think the problem here was more of a creative problem. I don't think Neil was very happy being in the band, and obviously over the years, would come and go. I think Stephen was quite happy with the Buffalo Springfield, and in many ways, the Buffalo Springfield really was Stephen because of his incredible talent as a songwriter, a singer, and as an acoustic guitar player. He just was fabulous. Richie was having a good time. I think it was creative. I don't think they just couldn't seem to focus on staying together, and part and parcel might have been the fact that they weren't having the success that they may have needed financially to make it work. The band was not wealthy by any means, and just getting by. So that could be a part of it. When people are expecting success in record companies, like Ahmet Ertegun was saying, "Hey, this is the greatest band of all time," and people were saying, "Oh, these guys are like the Beatles," and you get all this expectation flying around in one's head. Could have been a part of what the problem was. I don't know, because I was so young at the time. I can only look back and project what I think might have been happening. I do know. Go ahead.
Now, during this time, you still have to pay your bills. They were taking a lot of your time. So, were you also recording, pretty much anybody that came in the studio, or did you get to pick and select who you worked with?
Well, when I finally started working as a producer for the Buffaloes, let's put it this way. When I finally was employed as a performing artist with the Buffalo Springfield, they paid me a salary, and I think my salary was about $500 or $550 a week.
Oh, wow!
So that was enough for me to pay for my rent and my food. I wasn't married, and the only time I ever spent any money really was on gas and rent and utilities. So I didn't have any expensive habits and didn't have any girlfriends. They wouldn't have much to do with me.
You're a wise man there, Jim.
Yeah. Well, during the time when you're supposed to be out having a good time with a gal, I was in the studio. And by the time I was out of the studio, everyone else was back in bed again. So there was no time for any socializing in those days for me. So
you came out.
I managed to save a few bucks.
You probably came out better in the long run. I promise you.
I think so. I hope so.
So how'd you leave Buffalo Springfield? I
left Buffalo Springfield because the group broke up as a group, and it was a very sad moment for many of us. I was disappointed that the band couldn't stay together. I think Stephen wanted to keep it together. I think all of us did, and in fact, we tried when Neil left. but the four of us are. In fact, if you look at the last time around picture, that was the Buffalo Springfield was the four of us, and then they put Neil on, pasted him on the cover with his head looking the other way. And then I think for Stephen, he needed more than what could be offered there. He was at a point in time where I think he was already working with Buddy Miles and other artists and stuff. And I think when they finally got David and Graham Nash together, and they were such really good songwriters and singers, that was very inspiring, I think, for Stephen, and really the right way for him to go at that point in time. I wasn't mature enough as a writer and a singer to really contribute anything when I was 19 years old. Richie was a good singer and just really kind of growing as a songwriter. But Stephen was pretty well along as a commercial songwriter. He was really, I think, ahead of us in a lot of ways.
So then you jumped to Poco?
Then went to Poco after that. Yeah, yes.
So now that's where you.
That all started with Richie and I in the back seat of a taxi cab. I wanted to know. I asked him. I said, "What do you plan on doing?" And he said, "I don't know." And I said, "Well, have you thought about maybe taking some of your influences, like Kind Woman and Child's Claim to Fame? I mean, they're pretty country oriented, and maybe looking at that as a direction." And he did not see himself as a country artist. And I said, "Well, what I'm thinking more as, I mean, if you look at Buffalo Springfield, it's really a folk rock band." I said, "What about the idea of taking the direction your songs are moving in?" I said, I'd be a part of the band if you wanted to form a group, and instead of doing folk rock, let's try doing country rock. So it includes your music, your style of music in it. Yeah. And that came from me being a producer of the band and making suggestions and having thoughts about it, since Richie and I have become friends. But it wasn't until we got those songs back from New York, in Buffalo Springfield, Kind Woman, for instance, we hired, I was going to hire Red Rhodes or Tom Brumley or Sneaky Pete or somebody like that to come in and play on that record. But our tech, Miles Thomas, had suggested that we consider bringing in a young guy from Colorado named Rusty Young, who's closer to our age. And he said, "I think you guys really like him. He plays well, and he'd do a great job." So I said, "Yeah, let's give it a try." So we brought in Rusty. We were working on Kind Woman, and it was during that session that I looked over to Richie and I said, "You know what? That conversation that we had about perhaps doing more of a country rock band, this might be the guy to bring it in and make it happen." And I think that's the moment in time in which Poco really began to have a seed of life. And once the group had busted off, you said, Poco began, but it began because we'd already put some thought toward the idea, and Rusty was already on the record, so we brought Rusty out, and that was the beginning of our audition process for putting together the country rock band that was eventually known as Poco. It had not really been named at that time.
It's actually a different, unique sound. I mean, did you ever consider going down the road, we'll say, like of gangster rap or anything like that?
No.
Well, a lot of people...
That would be a big hell no.
A lot of people say that Poco's a prequel to the Eagles. Do you see the similarities?
Well, you have to look at it from this standpoint. Poco had started first, and of course, Don Henley and Glenn Fry had a group called Long Branch Penny Whistle, I think is what it was called. And they would come and watch us at the Troubadour, and I think they were what's the right word?
Stealing?
Well, they were very excited about what we were doing, and I think that perhaps it could have inspired them to take a tact in a similar way. But they also were great songwriters eventually, and Poco had the problem, and a couple of problems. Number one, we chose poorly when it came to management. Richie had a relationship with a guy named Dick Davis who came into. He was the road manager for Buffalo Springfield after the Springfield had gotten rid of their management company. So there was a lot of mistrust about managers as far as Richie was concerned. He trusted Dickie as he had been there with him in the Springfield, and sort of pushed the idea of letting Dickie manage Poco. He was not a manager. He was not diplomatic, and he, a couple of times with Ahmet Erdogan, and as well as Jerry Moss and Clive Davis had really inappropriately made remarks that just did not work to our best interest. So eventually, if you don't have the record company president executives who are very excited about you initially, if you're not continuing to inspire good faith, they're going to not work as hard,
right?
Because of it takes so much money to invest in a band, to promote it, to sell it, to record it, that if you've got obstacles from the beginning, I would be, if I was any one of those men, I'd be hesitant about making that investment until I was secure that they had good representation. So that was a bad start for us. The second thing that was bad was that we were creating music at a time when radio stations, when we eventually got the album recorded, and we eventually got to the stations with Epic's promotion team, we'd get one of two responses. We'd get, at a rock station, they'd say, we really like this music, but it's just a little too country for us. And then at a country station, they go, wow, this is pretty nice, but it's just a little too rock for us. So we were caught between a rock and a hard spot at a point in time when the music was not ready to go either way. You got to realize this was a time when Earl Haggard was doing Okie from Muskogee, right?
You're a pioneer, Jim.
Yeah, so it wasn't there. When Merle Haggard finally went, you know what, maybe I made a mistake, and let his hair grow, by this time, the Eagles have taken what we had started, and they made it more rock, and they made it work for their stations, and they made it work for their style. They were great singers. They're really, really good songwriters. They had great management. They had great agency. They had many of the things that we didn't have, which, number one, was the luxury of letting a little time pass, but also choosing people who had great relationships with the companies who they trusted, that if they said, yeah, this group will be out on the road, yes, we're going to book this group, yes, radio likes them, and it all worked. So I think it was a combination of things that we as a group really made mistakes on.
And I saw that you just got worn out from all the touring, too.
I totally I got worn out from Springfield, and then by the time we got into Poco, with the lack of success, it meant working harder. I signed a deal and went from I went from Atlantic Records to Epic Records, which was a CBS corporation. They signed me as an independent record producer and an artist to a company that would not allow the engineer, which I was, to touch the board. There was a collective co-bargaining agreement with the union that disallowed an artist from being able to touch the board, so I was never able to take my craft and talent as an engineer and make the kind of records that I heard. Our first record, Picking Up the Pieces, was so flat and so bad, in my opinion. I was so disappointed and had worked so hard to just get it to where it was. And it's not because the people were incompetent or anything. I mean, Terry, I think Duncan or Donahue was a really good engineer, but he engineered, Andy Williams. He engineered strings. They had